I believe in the future of agriculture.
With a faith born not of words but of deeds.
Achievements won by present and past generations of agriculturalists.
In the promise of better days through better ways.
Even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us through the struggles of former years.
This is the very first paragraph of the FFA Creed. The FFA Creed was written by E.M. Tiffany and adopted at the Third National FFA Convention. It was revised at the 38th and 63rd conventions. As FFA members and agricultural students, not only did this hit close to home, this was our home.
All right, so what's your name?
My name is Bernadette Church. I was Bernadette Ragley, and I grew up in Fernhill.
How old were you when the flood hit?
Not quite 2 months old. I was a premature baby. I was about 4 pounds at that time.
I was 17 years old, and not the 17-year-old you have today. By no means. I'd already left home when I was 15 years old, already quit school, and was working in a sawmill, and I was out on my own, living on my own in a sawmill, making big money, making $2 a nickel an hour, and that was good money back then. I was driving, had an old car I was driving around, and so that's kind of the way it was. But go ahead and ask your question now.
Okay, so first of all, can you say your name, please?
What?
Say your name.
Oh yeah, I'm George Owsley.
Okay.
Agriculture is everything. It's not just the food you eat. Agriculture is your clothes, your home, your communities. So what happens when your home is floating down the overfilled river? Your cousins can't get out of their town because the bridge washed away? What happens when a natural disaster takes everything away from you but your memories?
Well, I remember the night I was staying at Pepperwood. My parents were all over there in Shively, and it's been raining like hell. And I was up at Pepperwood. I thought it was plenty high enough off the river. I just bought a brand new pair of boots, and I set my boots up on the kitchen table and got in my car, and I took off headed for, it was evacuating. Everybody's getting evacuated out. They already evacuated homes, and Shively, they evacuated my parents and my brothers and sisters all to Redell. They were still living with an aunt. Back then, you just sleep on the floor and there's just everywhere. And I remember I was over at Pepperwood, and they came in and told us we had to get out. And I remember 1953 Mercury, and I remember it was a nice rig. I remember getting ready to leave, and I had an old pair of shoes I put on. I had a brand new pair of engineer boots. I remember putting them on the kitchen table. And I remember making the joke that, well, if the water gets to here, the table will float. You know, keep my boots, the table will float, and it's be all right. But
The house is off the ground quite high, and the backyard or area is a little bit lower than our front yard, and we had about 4 feet of water in the house. And I don't know if my parents opened the windows. I recall them saying they did, just if large debris would come through, it could kind of float through and find its way out.
Humboldt County experienced this grave fate during the Christmas flood of 1964. Before the 64 flood, there was another flood in 55. While not as drastic, it was still very destructive. The 55 storm affected the Central Sahara and Southern Bay areas. The Eel River on the north coast saw its greatest flow of record at that time. On December 24th, 1955, a levee on the west bank of the Feather River collapsed and a wall of water 21 feet high entered the country, flooding Yuba City and the land in the southern Yuba City area. It is estimated that 600 people were rescued by helicopter, but sadly 37 people drowned. However awful the destruction of the 55 flood, nothing compared to the flood that came 9 years later.
The flood of 1964 began on December 21st. The flood reached its peak on the 23rd and continued on to early January of 1965. Regular rain had saturated the ground from November to December, making rivers already full and flowing. The warm Pineapple Express, a strong and persistent flow of atmospheric moisture from the Hawaiian Islands, flooded any stream, pond, lake, and river in its path. in this case the Eel River and the Willamette rivers. By January 6th, it was the end of the flooding.
This tragedy immediately affected thousands of people. Some lost homes, businesses, and others lost livestock and lives. Over 4,000 heads of livestock went missing or died. Hundreds of homes were destroyed or floated away.
Our family has and still has registered jerseys, and my grandfather had a prize-winning cow. She was just known for a world record for her butterfat and her milk production. So she died in the flood, and currently there's a plaque at Ferndale Fairgrounds for her. Joyce was her name, and they lost a bull, but they did lose heifers, calves that didn't get to high ground. I know they got some of the cattle into the fairgrounds later that week, but most of the cattle were with my grandparents, and they didn't get water that high. They still could milk by hand because we had no power.
Even people who were not involved were affected emotionally. California was and continues to be the top producer of agriculture products such as dairy, grain, and other commodities. Losing one of its counties took a toll on the state's financial stability. The flood heavily damaged or completely devastated at least 10 towns in Humboldt County. Ferndale, Shively, and Willits were destroyed, as well as 20 major highway and county bridges.
And the middle of the river was just really wall to wall, and houses were floating down the river. And I remember being there, and I recognized one of the houses coming down. It looked like my mother's house coming down the river, and I was a little upset because I had some nice rifles that was in the house. I lost them on. I wanted to chase the house down the river, chase it on the road, on the bank, try to keep up with it, but there's no way. Now, a lot of the houses were hit in the little pier on the bridge at Riedel, on the south end of Riedel. They were hitting the middle pier. The houses would come down, they'd hit it. Some of them would hit it and kind of hang up on it, and they'd just shake real hard, and then they would just bust all the pieces and go into the water. And then they just come up kindling way down the river. They'd come back up to the top, just come up kindling. But our house missed the pier and went on down the river, and that was the last I seen it in the ocean.
Water carried away millions of board feet of lumber and logs from mill sites. The flood destroyed thousands of acres of agricultural land, killed over 4,000 head of livestock, and caused $100 million in damage in Humboldt County alone.
As terrible as the destruction was, Humboldt's communities immediately began to help one another. The community spirit was inspiring. In the days, weeks, and months after the '64 flood, communities came together, towns were rebuilt, often bigger, better, and stronger than they were before. As a result of the flood, we now have better construction, better knowledge and planning, as well as means to protect ourselves from another freak storm flashing. With the help of the U.S. Coast Guard, many lives have been saved. Although in an attempt to bring civilians to safety, 2 rescue helicopters crashed from the harsh storms, killing all in the helicopters. Buildings that could be saved were turned into shelters for surviving families, and buildings that were unsalvageable were scrapped for materials to rebuild.
Do you think there will ever be a flood as drastic as the 1964 flood?
Well, people said that there wouldn't be a flood as great as the 1955 flood. And here, almost 10 years later, they had this other flood. So, time will tell. And I think people that went through the 64 flood know what to watch for. And I think most of them would be well prepared, having gone through that.
The '64 flood was undoubtedly a destructive tragedy, and many people lost everything. But it was also a triumph of community. People from Humboldt and other places came together to help rescue and rebuild lives.
During this time, radio and TV stations warned people how big the flood was and where it was happening, so that the community could come together and help the people in danger.
I believe that American agriculture can and will hold true to the best traditions of our national life, and that I can exert an influence in my home and community, which will stand solid for my part in that inspiring task.